So, today I will focus my presentation in this IAV model that I will introduce soon, that is the Ichimura-Austen-Vincent model. So I will discuss the topic of inclusive breakup. So first of all, I'll try to motivate, to convince you that this is an interesting problem, that it's a commonplace in nuclear reaction. It's a problem that appears in many situations, that has many applications. And I will introduce the model that I will use later on, that is this IAV model. And I will show some comparison with experimental data and some application of the model to some other kind of reactions, like incomplete fusion reactions, including the so-called surrogate method. Finally, maybe if I have time, I don't know, maybe no, some very preliminary, very short application to the problem of knockout reaction studies. So the motivation, I will somehow introduce it chronologically or historically. This is the probably the problem that called our attention to this problem. That is at that time, more than 10 years ago, we were studying inclusive breakup reactions of elastic scattering and inclusive breakup of weakly bound nuclei with our colleagues from Sevilla and other universities abroad. And there was some, after many efforts of development, of theoretical and also experimental development, we came to this nice result for elastic scattering that you can see, that summarizes somehow all these theoretical developments. This is the comparison of elastic data of helium-6 for two experiments, compared with the so-called four-body CDCC calculations that, as probably many of you know, describe this reaction as a four-body problem consisting of three-body description of helium-6 plus the target. So you see the elastic data was very nicely reproduced, but then when we looked at the alpha production, this is inclusive alpha production from the same experiment, and this is actually a ratio, a probability. This is a ratio between the alpha production and helium-6. So it's a ratio between alphas and elastic scattering, essentially. You see that the same calculation that nicely reproduces the elastic data completely fails to reproduce this alpha yield. So this means there is something here that we did not understand very well. And to some extent, that was somehow contradictory, that the model that described so well the elastic data could not describe at all the inclusive breakup data. But helium-6 is a probably very complicated system, so probably it's not the best system to study a problem for the first time, at least the first time for us. So it's always interesting to go back to the nice case of the deuteron proton-neutron bound system. So here is a comparison between deuteron elastic breakup data, so deuteron on carbon target producing proton, neutron, and this is an experiment in which both the proton and neutron were detected on a range of angles, for example, of one of the two particles. And this is the angular distribution of the proton for fixed angle of the neutron. You see that the data is very well described by two calculations here. One of them is a popular CDCC method, and the other one is a more sophisticated Fadeyev method that also coincide or agree between them. So that was very satisfactory. But then again, when we looked at the inclusive data, this is sorry enough for this reaction. So this data are for different target, but it essentially is the same problem. So the proton angular distribution, for example, the inclusive proton angular distribution was completely underpredicted by the CDCC calculation. So we are again in a situation that is qualitatively similar to the one that we found for helium-6, but for a much simpler case for the deuteron, which is something that we can handle much better. So the reason clearly is that when we don't look at the neutron and the target, when we don't identify the state of all particles, where in inclusive measurement, there are many processes that may actually contribute to this singles cross-section. So these other contributions will add to the so-called elastic breakup contribution. So by elastic breakup, we mean the process in which the deuteron breaks and the target remains in the ground state and the two fragments fly away. And so in addition to this elastic breakup mode, there are obviously some other contributions that we cannot isolate in an inclusive measurement. So one is simply the target excitation. So the proton and the neutron, they are not captured, but the target may be excited. Then there are processes in which, for example, one of the two fragments, this is an example for lithium-6, but we can imagine a similar situation for deuterium. So one of the two fragments is captured somehow by the target. And by capture, I mean, for example, transfer, or it could be an incomplete fusion. So any process in which one of the two fragments is absorbed in a general sense, and the other fragment is detected. So this process will contribute again to the inclusive cross-section in this example for alpha particles. And finally, we might also form a compound nucleus of the whole system and then have a subsequent evaporation of particles, a process that we call complete fusion, and then the evaporation of the different particles or gamma rays. So for a reaction that I will use consistently this notation for a projectile consisting of B plus X. So for example, the deuteron is proton plus neutron, or lithium-6 will be alpha plus deuteron. And we detect only one of the two fragments. The total inclusive cross-section will contain this elastic breakup contribution, that is the one here represented on the top, that in some context, in some other applications, is called the diffraction part of the reaction. And then we will have many other contributions that we globally call non-elastic breakup. These are all these contributions here, non-elastic breakup. These are processes that will be added to this one. And then finally, we will have some compound nucleus contribution that eventually may evaporate also the P particle. So clearly, we are now facing a much more difficult problem for elastic breakup. I have shown before, we have a series of models. I see this is IFA, DWVA, and many others that can accurately reproduce the data. Even for complete fusion, we have a robust theory based on a statistical theory of Hauser and Feshbach. But then for this intermediate situation, since there are so many processes contributing, the situation is more challenging. So in principle, we might attempt to compute this inclusive breakup by, let's say, by brute force, by summing one by one all the contributions that we consider that can contribute to the inclusive cross-section using DWVA, or if we want some more elaborated theory like a coupled reaction channel. But this approach, this brute force approach, has some serious limitations and shortcomings. So first of all, this the range of states of X. So X will be the particle that we do not observe. The X particle, XA states, will in general cover a very wide range of excitation energies. So this means that the number of states that we are populating will be in general huge. Also, part of these states will lie in the continuum with the usual complications that usually imply dealing with the continuum. And also, if we are to include all these physical states, we need information for our calculations for DWA. We need spectroscopy factors and we need spin parity. This information in general is very poorly known as we go a few MeV in excitation energy. Finally, another limitation is that in addition to the direct processes, so for example, the target excitation of the one particle transfer, we may have processes that we may call partial fusion or incomplete fusion that are not easily taken into account by these standard theories, because these theories are designed, are thought for direct reactions. So we have all these complications if we try to solve the problem by including explicitly all this. So the alternative to this is to use what are called the inclusive breakup models. And these models are based on, or provide a closed form formula and provide an efficient way, and I would say also an elegant way of computing all this inclusive cross-section. And this is done by introducing some optical potential, some kind of Feshbach reduction in the way that I will show in a minute. So we'll present the model not in a very rigorous way, not actually in the standard way in which this is presented in the original paper. I'll try to do in a different way that it's probably, hopefully, is a bit more intuitive. So this is a very basic reminder of something that I'm sure that all of you know very well, but that this is just useful to establish the language of the problem. So you all know when we have a two-body problem, so just forget about the three-body structure. So we describe A plus A scattering. We can solve, if we are just interested in describing, for example, elastic scattering, we don't need to include all the channels contributing to the problem. We know that we have a way of describing the problem by considering only the ground state of the projectile and the target, and this is called in the Feshbach formally, this is called the P space and Q space separation. And there is a formal equation for this component of the wave function that describes the elastic scattering, and this translates, or this leads to an effective potential operator, this V, that contains not only the bare interaction between the projectile and the target, but also contains all the couplings, all the flags, all the competitions with different channels that are affecting the elastic scattering. So, you know, this in general, this formal object is too complicated to handle, but we can replace this by some energy average and complex potential. That is what we call the optical potential. So this phi, this function here, contains asymptotically only the elastic channel, but if we are interested in computing all non-elastic channels, then we have we can use the optical theorem, and from the imaginary part of this optical potential and this projected wave function, we can compute the total reaction cross-section. So if we are interested in the integrated sum of all non-elastic channels, there is no, it doesn't make any sense trying to put one by one all the states, because we have this closed form formula. So now for the three-body case, we can do something similar. So we have a three-body problem. So we have a scattering problem, A plus A, leading to B, X, and A. And we want to do exactly the same. We don't want to solve the problem in the whole space. We want to solve the problem in a restricted model space. We want to somehow do the same thing as we have done for the two-body problem, which means we want to freeze the target in the ground state. We want to project the target in the ground state. And this results in the same way as before. This results in a complex effective interaction between X and A. Now we are interested in a specific final state that consists in the fragment B surviving, and this fragment B, the one that we observe, with some momentum. So this will be detected with some energy and some angle. So we have to solve this now effective, this channel function X has to be solved subject to this constraint, to this condition. So as in the two-body case, asymptotically, this XA wave function contains only the ground state by construction, by definition. But again, if we are interested in the processes in which A is somehow excited, then we can use a sort of generalized optical theorem. So we can compute all the non-elastic breakup components by applying this optical model theorem for a specific final state of the fragment B, characterized by some momentum. And this is written in this way. Or if we want to write it in terms of the energy of the angle, we just have to introduce the appropriate factor. And we will have an expression that is the analogous of this one for the two-body case. So this provides the reaction cross-section, all non-elastic channels in the two-body case. This will provide all non-elastic channels in the XA system, which by definition is non-elastic breakup. And this contains also the condition that the B particle survives. Another, the problem is how to compute this wave function. So this is the formula that we want to apply. And but the problem is how to compute this one. And And for that, there is not a unique answer. Actually, this is a problem that was addressed by many groups, but mostly in the late 70s and mostly in the 80s and 90s. Here, this is a collection, is an incomplete collection of works, but these are the main works that I will refer. So actually, this is a problem that recently has also attracted the attention of several groups, including ours in Sevilla. And there was, for example, a nice meeting that I have very nice remembers of this meeting at MSU in 2016. It was organized mainly by Gregory Putel and Filomena Nunes, that I think she's in the audience, and with the participation of Mahir Hussein, who was one of the persons that contributed to these theories, and that unfortunately passed away last year. So this is, in any case, he contributed also very much in his last years to the revival of this problem and to the new developments around it. So the calculation of this X channel wave function is standardly in all these theories done in the so-called spectator model. So the spectator model simply means that the B particle, that is the fragment that we observe, the one that survives, is assumed to simply scatter by the target, but does not participate in the breakup process. And this means essentially that we describe its motion by some distorted wave with some momentum, that is the momentum that we will observe this fragment. And there is a very general formula which more or less derives from the definition of this X-channel wave function. So if we are working in a three-body model, this channel function can be written in this way, that is the projection. So assuming that we have a three-body solution, a three-body description, a three-body wave function of our problem, we have to project this function on the final state of the V particle. And this, more or less, by definition, although there is a more formal derivation of that, give us the channel wave function within this three-body model. So in principle, what we have to do is to compute the three-body model with some formulas, project in a given final state of the V particle, and this provides us with this channel function. And then we go back to our optical theory and compute for this particular final state of the V particle, we compute this expectation value. In practice, this is not so simple because, well, first we could go to a very sophisticated version of this psi, for example, the Faddeev solution, but this, except for very few cases, is extremely difficult to compute. So this is definitely something that you cannot do in as a routine. Then a more feasible solution would be, for example, a CDCC solution. This is an approximate solution also of the three-body problem. The problem is that this CDCC solution, that is consists in an expansion of the three-body wave function in terms of Bx states, in terms of the projectile states. This function is known to be accurate for small Bx separations, but it's not necessarily accurate for all the range of separations of this coordinate. So, well, in practice, we may not get an accurate form for this function. So there is an alternative way of computing this, and this is essentially what these models that have been presented before provide. So essentially, most of these models rely on integral expressions for this channel function. So instead of using this expression here, we go to an expression this kind. So for example, still within the three-body picture, we can obtain a three-body approximation for this, solving this kind of inhomogeneous equation, where this V post is the usual post operator that appears in transfer reactions. Or if we want to do a bit simpler, we approximate this by the usual DWBA factorization, which means the product of some distorted wave of the projectile times the internal wave function of the projectile. And this provides us with a sort of DWBA version of this expression here. This is actually the Ichimura-Austen-Vincent expression that I will use for the rest. And there are two more versions, or two more prescriptions that were discussed a lot at that time. One is the analogous, the prior form analogous to this one. This is the expression of Udagawa and Tamura that essentially solves the same problem, but replacing the V post by the V prior. You know, in DWBI there is a post prior equivalence, but here this equivalent does not hold in the same way. So these two expressions lead to different results. And we have one additional formula that is the one proposed by Hussein and Batvoy, essentially the same year, that doesn't contain any potential. So this formula is a sort of overlap between the initial state described like this and the final state like this. So this is the Hussein-Batvoy formula. So clearly, not all these expressions can be correct. They lead to different results. And well, recently, as I said, some groups have performed calculations and comparisons with experimental data. So what more or less I think consistently comes out from these calculations is that the model comparing these three models, the model that more accurately reproduces the data is the one by Ichimura, Auster, and Vincent. And actually, there is a relation between the channel functions of these three models. This is an interesting relation that relates the channel functions in these three models here, and you see the different contributions of these three. So this is for a lithium-6 alpha reaction, which means we detect the alpha particle, and we don't know what happened to the deuterium. Maybe it broke up or was absorbed, or well, we don't care. So this is, here you see a situation in which the Ichimura, Auster, and Vincent reproduces very well this inclusive data. In order to compare with the data, we have to include also, these theories are for the non-elastic breakup contribution. Remember that we have to include also a possible elastic breakup contribution, that is this magenta line. So when we add the two contributions, we reproduce the data only when we use this Ichimura and Vincent, but not with the Udagawa and Tamura formula. So that's the reason why in the rest I will refer mostly to this IAV model. Before showing the comparison with the data, let me stress something that's very important and also very interesting of these theories. We have to solve once more. This is the equation for the X-channel wave function. So in the Ichimura, Auster, and Vincent model, so this contains a potential U. This potential arises because of the projection of the problem into the target ground state in the same way that appears in the CDCC calculations or even in the two-body scattering. We have this potential. But now the nice thing is that this potential or this equation can be solved for positive or negative energies. Here, positive energies refers to energies above the threshold, the breakup threshold for X plus the target. So these are unbound states of the X plus A system. So this is essentially describing a sort of, we may call it a transfer to continuum states. And the imaginary part in this case, so U in this case is as we can relate it, associate it with the standard optical model potential, and the imaginary part accounts for the absorption taking place in the X plus A system. But we can also extend this to negative energies because the X particle can go to bound states, and this is what we usually call transfer. But the way in which we describe here this transfer is, so we keep here this potential to be imaginary, to be complex, sorry. So in that case, the real part of this potential represents the distribution of single particle or the single particle states. The imaginary part is accounted for the single particle fragmentation. So this is telling us a given single particle state, how it's distributed in energy. So we have a sort of average description of the transfer process. We are not intended here to describe one by one all the single particle states. We are just trying to describe the whole contribution of this single particle state. So we don't need, in principle, here to use spectroscopic factors and so on, because all this information is encoded in the optical potential. Before comparing with the data, so these two properties can be accommodated very naturally in the so-called dispersive optical model potentials, which also were extensively studied in the 80s by people like Maho and Sartor, and now recently in the last few years also have experienced a sort of revival, a sort of they have been revisited by several groups. So with this model, we can, in principle, if we have a realistic dispersive optical potential, so this dispersive optical potential describes this unbound region and also the bound region. So we can describe the transfer to unbound states and transfer to bound states simultaneously within the same framework. And this makes sense because we want to evaluate the inclusive cross-section. We want to take into account all possible contributions. So these are calculations, there's no data here. These were done by, I guess, by Gregory Potel, is in the review paper that I've shown before. This is for different calcium isotopes, a DP inclusive reaction. So this is not the standard transfer reaction. So in principle, we can populate here final states in the continuum of bound states. And here this is plotted, this cross-section, as a function of the energy. So this is integrated in angle, and this is the energy of the neutron, the energy of the particle that we don't observe with respect to the target. So positive energies of the neutron corresponds to these unbound states. And for unbound states, we have two contributions. We have the elastic breakup, in which the neutron simply scatters elastically. This is just diffraction. This is another way of treating diffraction. And then we have the non-elastic breakup contribution, that is the top line here. And this non-elastic breakup contribution that is computed with this goes to negative energy. At the negative energies, we have the peaks that correspond to the bound states that are predicted by the dispersive optical potential that was used here. If this potential is realistic enough, it should correspond to the physical bound state of the system, or more or less to the centroids of the single particle strengths, to be more precise. So let me finally, showing the theory, start with the comparison with experimental data. So first of all, let me go back to the problem of the inclusive breakup of the deuterium. So remember, we have the problem, this is for nickel-58 reaction at 100 MeV. This is the deuterium incident energy. And this is a double differential cross-section as a function of the proton angle. So this is the particle that we observe. The spectator here is the proton. The neutron is the particle that we do not observe. If we compare this with the CDC calculation, which accounts only for the diffraction part, only for the elastic breakup contribution, then we again underpredict the data. And this is something that you see in essentially all reactions that you consider, not only of particular reactions. So we have to add now the contribution coming from the non-elastic breakup, that is the green line here. And actually you see that this is dominant, and this is also a very general property of these reactions. And when you sum the two contributions incoherently, then you see that you can reproduce quite well the data, pretty well the data. There is an underprediction here. And actually, this is because we have an additional contribution that has not been taken into account. That is a contribution coming from the protons, which are just evaporated from the compound nucleus. Because remember, we had the three contributions, the elastic breakup and non-elastic breakup, with the survival of the fragment. And then we have just the compound nucleus, followed by the evaporation of one particle, that in this case is a proton. So this is better seen in the energy distribution of the protons, because in the same experiment, in principle, one can detect, one can record the energy of this proton. This is for a given proton angle that corresponds to this angle here. And you see that there is a bump, a big bump here, that is centered roughly at half of the incident energy, around 50 MeV, and that contains contributions coming from elastic breakup in red and from the non-elastic breakup. And then there is a contribution here that we do not reproduce with either of these two methods. This contribution here that we have included here a calculation that comes from literature, it's not ours, this corresponds to this pre-equilibrium plus compound nucleus followed by evaporation. So the missing cross-section here is because of this additional contribution. Going to a more complicated system, like a lithium-6, so there are also a large amount of data for alpha singles cross-section, so alpha production on systematically, but one observes in this experiment is that the amount of alpha particle exceeds the deuterium yield by a factor of 3 or 4. And this is directly seen from the spectra, experimental spectra. So you see the branch of alpha particles here, and this is the deuteriums are somewhere here, and you see that the amount of alpha particle is much larger than the amount of deuteriums. This is clearly telling us that the process cannot be considered as an elastic breakup process. We don't have just a dissociation of lithium-6 into a deuterium and alpha particle elastic dissociation, because in that case, we would expect to have the same amount of alpha particles and deuterium, which is not the case. So clearly, something is happening to this deuterium. They interact, they may break up. We don't know, because they are not, this is not the purpose of this theory. And here you see the angular distribution for different energies. Actually, here this covers energies below the barrier and above the barrier, if I recall correctly. And you see, this is a comparison with the elastic breakup. You see, systematically, elastic breakup is much lower than the data. And then when you add the non-elastic breakup contribution, and here we systematically use this IAV model, so that corresponds to the green lines here. You can reproduce very nicely the data. Sometimes you have some overestimation, sometimes there are some tests you don't reproduce, but I think overall, the agreement with the data, not only for this reaction, so for other lithium-6 reaction, is very satisfactory. Here, let me emphasize that there are no parameters which are adjusted to reproduce the data. So here the ingredients are essentially the optical potentials between the alpha and the target nucleus, the deuterium and the target. And also, we don't need to include all these final states one by one, or spectroscopy factors. We don't need all this information, detailed information. So in principle, if the potentials are accurate enough, this potential know about all this information, in principle. Let me show you one application to a halo nucleus, to beryllium-11, that we analyzed along with our collaborator from Catania, Alessia Di Pietro and her group. This is for beryllium-11 on zinc 64, this energy. And again, this is an inclusive measurement. This is very typical of reactions with a neutron halo nuclei, because you know neutrons are difficult to detect. So there are many measurements which are inclusive. And this is for the beryllium-10 energy distribution at several specific angles. And once more, you see that the elastic breakup contribution is just, is not enough to describe the data. In this case, elastic breakup is dominant, and this is also something that happens with elastic, with neutron halo nuclei. Let me move. So next, I'd like to discuss the application to fusion. The time is going fast. So first, to complete fusion. Actually, I don't have an introduction, a proper introduction to fusion, because last week, Jesus Lubian from Rio made a very nice and very, I think, comprehensive, very academic, pedagogical introduction to the problem. So this will hopefully save me, you were in his presentation, probably this will save me some minutes of introduction. But let me just focus on a particular problem that we tried to address. That is the problem of complete fusion suppression that was also addressed by Lubian. And this is a problem that appears when one studies complete fusion with involving weakly bound nuclei. So in principle, the independence of the entrance channel of fusion reactions tell us that if we have two reactions, for example, of this type that lead to the same compound nucleus, then they should have essentially the same cross-section. But this is not the case. The reaction with involving the weakly bound nucleus, lithium-7, the cross-section is suppressed by something like 30%. This number is also very stable for lithium-7 reactions and is similar to for other weakly bound nuclei. And the common interpretation of this suppression is that this is due to the flux that goes to other channels, in particular to incomplete fusion. So typically the picture that is used to interpret these processes is that there is an incomplete fusion mechanism that consists in the breakup in the elastic dissociation of lithium-7. So lithium-7 dissociates into an alpha and a triton, and then only one of the two fragments is captured by the target. So this takes part of the flux, the other fragment survives. So this is not complete fusion. So this is a kind of competitor of the complete fusion process. However, there are calculations done, for example, by a Canberra group, by Nanda Dasgupta and her collaborators there, using classical trajectories, in which they try to incorporate this two-step picture consisting of this elastic dissociation followed by the capture of one of the fragments. And this tends to underpredict the amount of suppression. So you get some suppression, but much smaller than the one that is observed experimentally. We tackle also this problem in a different way, and we consider that complete fusion is part of the reaction cross-section. So we can split the reaction cross-section for the process. If the system is not too complicated, hopefully we can do something like that. We can decompose it into the complete fusion contribution, some inelastic, possibly some inelastic contribution coming from projectile of target excitation, not involving breakup, then the elastic breakup contribution, and then finally non-elastic breakup contributions. And here, since we are considering the total reaction cross-section, we have two possible contributions, one in which the B particle survives and the X particle is absorbed, and then the other reaction, the other way around, the X particle survives and the B particle is absorbed. So we can, assuming that we can evaluate these contributions accurately, then we can deduce the complete fusion cross-section by just subtracting to the reaction cross-section all these contributions. And by the way, the reaction cross-section can also be computed accurately either with the optical model or with CDCC calculations, particularly if we have elastic scattering data that we can adjust some optical model potential. And for the other contributions, for inelastic excitations can be computed also with standard coupled channels calculation, for example, the elastic breakup with the CDCC method. And here, this is probably the most difficult part, that is that we computed with the IAV model once more. By the way, this incomplete fusion, that is the one that is has been assumed to be responsible for this suppression, is included in principle in the non-elastic breakup. So this non-elastic breakup accounts for the fusion of one of the fragments with the target that is incomplete fusion. So before showing the complete fusion, let me just show you the contribution of the different pieces for two reactions, the two reactions that were analyzed by this Canberra group, lithium-6 on bismuth, lithium-7 on bismuth. This is the reaction cross-section as a function of the incident energy. And these are the different contributions. And you see that the elastic breakup is a small fraction of the reaction cross-section. So this elastic dissociation mechanism can hardly be responsible for the strong suppression of the complete fusion. On the other hand, these non-elastic breakup contributions are very large, in particular, the one that comes from the absorption of the lighter fragment, the triton or the deuteron. These two are very, very important in the whole energy range. So we expect that the complete fusion suppression, so the main competitor of the complete fusion, is this non-elastic breakup. So this is finally the complete fusion cross-section for the two systems. So we start, our reference here could be a calculation that does not include all these effects. For example, a barrier penetration model. There are other groups using different reference calculations, but in any case, what we say is that with respect to this reference calculation, when we incorporate this additional contribution, this elastic breakup plus non-elastic breakup contributions, one can explain very nicely, I'd say, the complete fusion, and one can also find an explanation for the what are the mechanisms or the processes that are competing. The elastic breakup in particular plays a very small role in the suppression here. One interesting thing is that in principle, at these energies, for these incident energies, if one computes the energy of the light fragment, so the deuteron or the triton, with lithium-6, lithium-7, this energy is very small. It's actually below the Coulomb barrier for this particle, for the reaction. So a priori, it's not obvious how this incomplete fusion or this absorption of this light fragment can be so large, because, as I said, the respective energies is below the Coulomb barrier. So here we have to resort to a mechanism that is also known. This is not new. That is called the Trojan horse mechanism. And this is illustrated here. I don't give many details, but because I like to jump to a different thing. But this is the two-body reaction cross-section for in this particular case, is the deuteron with the target. So it's for the two-body system as a function of the two-body energy. And the same thing for the triton target. This reaction cross-section drops very quickly as we go down in energy and approach the barrier because of the penetration factor. But for the three-body case, for this reaction, if we do the cross-section, these are different incident energies. And we can plot, since we have the alpha energy, we can also infer the relative energy between X and the target. So you see that the cross-section can be very large and also is not suppressed at the Coulomb barrier. This is commonly referred as the Trojan horse mechanism, and this, as you probably know, is the basis of the Trojan horse method that is used in nuclear astrophysics. Probably I think I should finish now, so let me go to the, I will just show the final results. That is, and I will skip some other topics that I have prepared. So let me just show if I can, if the organizers let me do that. Let me just show the results, some very preliminary results for incomplete fusion. And this, I believe, is interesting because last week also in Louvian's presentation, there was some discussion about incomplete fusion, and they showed some very interesting results that they have obtained with a recent model developed by their group. So now, so here the point is that non-elastic breakup includes incomplete fusion, but includes some other effects. So non-elastic breakup is not just incomplete fusion because it includes, for example, target excitation that is not incomplete fusion. So the problem is how to isolate, how to extract the incomplete fusion component from the total non-elastic breakup. So here we use a heuristic, let's say, approach. And this is similar to the approach that some other people use even at the two-body level, that is to compute, to associate the incomplete fusion or the fusion with the absorption that takes place inside the Coulomb barrier due, for example, to some short-range deep imaginary potential. So essentially what we do is we just apply the same formula, the IAV formula. Everything is the same, but here we replace the imaginary part of the participant particle, the X particle, by a short-range imaginary potential. More or less is the same that was presented last week. So here we are aware that there are some limitations and some possible considerations. First is it's not clear if this potential should be energy dependent or not. In principle, it should, because as I have shown before, the potential between X and A should naturally lead to an energy dependence such that is consistent with dispersion relation. So this potential should, for example, vanish at the threshold. Also, well, in order this prescription to be meaningful, the calculated cross-section should be independent of the parameters of this potential. That in principle, this should happen if we take it to be sufficiently absorptive. Well, and also in order to do this, we have to, as also was emphasized that last week, we have to remove any surface imaginary potential, this XA system, because otherwise this surface potential tends to get most of the cross section, so we don't get realistic cross sections as well. So there are so this use of this short range potential for the computation of incomplete diffusion has been used by other groups, and these two works correspond to what was presented last week. So let me show you the very, very preliminary application. And by very preliminary means that the calculations were finished today. So this is a sort of disclaimer because there might be some errors. I didn't have the time to check convergence and to do the usual test of stability. But in any case, I think it's interesting to show you if they are preliminary. This is for the incomplete fusion of lithium-7 on tin. Data taken from this recent publication. Here we have, I'm sorry, I don't have the error bars for the data. So these diamonds corresponds to the Triton complete fusion, which means actually is the sum of these isotopes, which are supposed to be the main contributors to the Triton complete fusion, which means the Triton is absorbed by the target, the alpha particle survives. And this one agrees very well with the data. Again, sorry for not having the error bars. But for the alpha capture, the alpha incomplete fusion, which is in this publication associated to these isotopes, then the calculation overestimates the data loss. But this is taken from the publication of the group of Rio de Janeiro. So you see that qualitatively they are very similar. The energy here is center of mass. The data in principle are the same. And you see that here with this day model, they also reproduce the Triton incomplete fusion, but not the alpha incomplete fusion. So at least we say that the theory are consistent and have the same problem regarding the description of the data. This is another case. This is lithium-7 on bismuth incomplete fusion. So here, if I interpreted correctly, the data, there is no separation between the Triton and alpha. So they sum the contribution of all isotopes that should contribute to either Triton incomplete fusion or alpha incomplete fusion. So what they have, these orange circles corresponds at least to some lower limit for the total incomplete fusion. But in the calculation, we have the two contributions, the Triton capture, that is the solid line here, and the alpha capture, that is the dashed line. And when we add the two contributions, we see reasonable agreement, very good agreement, low energies, but then there is a large discrepancy for this incident energy. Again, if we compare with the results from Rubians and collaborators, we see a very similar picture here. So they essentially have a similar degree of agreement or disagreement. I might say that here spectroscopic factor, there was also some discussion of that, is fixed to 1. So we didn't adjust or scale by any spectroscopic factors, the calculation. But that's something that I think is unique, although I have said that there are some other models providing the complete fusion, but I think something that is very unique, and I think is more or less unique of these Ichimura, Austin, Vincent, and related models, is the possibility of computing also differential cross sections. So we can compute, for example, the angular distribution of the fragment, survival, or the energy distribution, and one can transform this energy distribution of the B fragment, the one that the spectator fragment, into, for example, a Q-value distribution of the residual nucleus or an excitation energy. And this is what I try to do here, again, to compare with the data from Caitlin Cook from this publication. This is the same reaction I have shown before at a specific energy, 40 MeV, but this is plotted as a function of the Q value or as a function of the excitation energy in the compound nucleus that is supposed to be formed when this is for the Triton capture. So this is the compound nucleus that results from the Triton plus bismuth system. So in excitation energy, there is a region that corresponds to bound states, and this does not contribute complete fusion, and then we have the Triton threshold, and this goes into the continuum. So you see, well, the agreement is not far from perfect, but I'd say that it's at least promising. So this is an indication that we can use these models also to predict energy distribution, even a spin distribution of the residual nucleus, and there are a number of applications for that. And this is the last thing I will show, but I will not explain this slide because I think I am over the time. So this is a possible application of this that has been also addressed by different groups, is the application to the so-called surrogate reactions, which is an indirect method to evaluate cross sections for example, neutron capture reactions, using a surrogate reaction, for example, a deuterium-induced reaction that leads to the same compound nucleus. So here, one from the theoretical point of view, one of the challenges is to predict the compound nucleus formation from the surrogate reaction, and this is exactly an incomplete fusion process of the same kind that I have been discussed before. But, since my time is over, I think I will stop here, and see, I have a lot of things to show. I just go to the conclusions. So I hope I have convinced you that that inclusive breakup is a interesting problem. It's a problem that appears in many applications, and it's a difficult problem to tackle, to address, but with the assistance of these closed form theories, like the one by Ichimura, Austin, and Vincent, we have an efficient way, an accurate way also of computing in these inclusive breakup cross sections. And also we can apply this to some related problems like the complete fusion suppression or incomplete fusion suppression, or there are some other applications that I didn't have the time to show, that, for example, to knockout reactions or to the surrogate method. And this is my last slide, which are thanks to Jean Lei, one of our hosts, for his collaborations, these years of collaboration, and for the many calculations that we have been doing along these years. And of course, to Mahir Hussein once more for being one of the contributors, main contributors to this subject, and for all the stimulating discussions that I had the opportunity to have with him. So thank you very much, and sorry for extending over the time.